Vladimir Putin, who has long been regarded as the dominant figure in Russian politics, is now facing one of the most challenging periods of his leadership. The war in Ukraine, initially intended to be a rapid and overwhelming demonstration of Russian military prowess, has devolved into a prolonged and grueling conflict. This war has not only strained Russia's military capabilities, but has also highlighted significant weaknesses within the Kremlin's strategic framework and Putin's ability to maintain control. From the outset, Putin's invasion of Ukraine was seen as a bold move to reassert Russia's influence over its neighboring countries and challenge the post-Cold War European order. However, the invasion quickly met with fierce resistance from Ukrainian forces, who, bolstered by Western military aid and support, managed to halt the Russian advance and even push back in several key areas. This resistance has transformed what was expected to be a short campaign into a drawn-out war of attrition, with heavy casualties on both sides and no clear victory in sight for Russia. The protraction of the conflict has had several damaging consequences for Putin. Domestically, the extended war has begun to erode the strongman image that has been central to his rule. For years, Putin has portrayed himself as the leader who restored Russia's military strength and reasserted its status as a global power. The ongoing difficulties in Ukraine, however, have contradicted this narrative, revealing that the Russian military is not as invincible as it was once believed to be. Reports of logistical issues, low morale among troops, and the loss of significant military assets have all contributed to the growing perception that Putin's military strategy is flawed. Internationally, the war has isolated Russia from much of the global community. The invasion has led to severe economic sanctions from the West, which have crippled key sectors of the Russian economy, including energy exports, financial services, and technology imports. These sanctions, combined with the cost of the war itself, have placed immense pressure on Russia's economy, leading to inflation, a declining ruble, and shortages of essential goods. This economic strain has, in turn, increased dissatisfaction among the Russian populace, further weakening Putin's domestic standing. The conflict has exposed the limits of Russia's alliances. While countries like China and India have maintained a neutral or supportive stance toward Russia, they have not provided the level of support that Putin may have anticipated. China's backing, for instance, has been more rhetorical than practical, with Beijing showing reluctance to breach Western sanctions. This tepid response from supposed allies has left Russia increasingly isolated and dependent on its own dwindling resources. The war has also had significant geopolitical ramifications. NATO, which was perceived as weakened and divided before the invasion, has found new purpose and unity in response to Russia's aggression. The alliance has expanded, with Finland and Sweden abandoning their long-standing neutrality to seek membership, further encircling Russia with NATO-aligned states. This expansion not only underscores the failure of Putin's strategy to weaken NATO, but also represents a strategic loss, as Russia now faces an even more formidable military alliance on its borders. The miscalculations in Ukraine have also led to growing discontent within the Russian elite. Reports suggest that there are factions within the Kremlin and the broader Russian power structure that are increasingly dissatisfied with the direction of the war and its impact on Russia's global standing. While Putin has maintained a tight grip on power through a combination of repression, control of the media, and the loyalty of security services, the continued failure in Ukraine could embolden his critics and rivals, potentially leading to challenges to his leadership. The core of Vladimir Putin's increasingly precarious position lies in the unexpected and rapidly improving effectiveness of Ukraine's military, which has been significantly strengthened by comprehensive Western support. This support, particularly the provision of advanced military hardware, such as Patriot missile systems and Western fighter jets, represents more than just symbolic assistance from Ukraine's allies. These strategic assets have the potential to fundamentally alter the trajectory of the conflict, challenging Russia's military dominance and undermining Putin's objectives in Ukraine. The Patriot missile systems, which are among the most advanced air defense systems in the world, have been a crucial addition to Ukraine's defensive capabilities. Manufactured by Raytheon Technologies, these systems are designed to detect, track, and intercept a wide range of aerial threats, including ballistic and cruise missiles, drones, and aircraft. Their deployment in Ukraine addresses a critical vulnerability in the country's defense infrastructure, the need to counter Russia's relentless air and missile attacks, which have targeted both military and civilian infrastructure throughout the conflict. Prior to the arrival of the Patriot systems, Ukraine's air defense was relatively outdated and insufficient to cope with the sophisticated aerial threats posed by Russia. Russian forces frequently leveraged their aerial superiority to launch devastating strikes, crippling Ukraine's ability to mount effective counteroffensives. However, with the introduction of the Patriot systems, Ukraine can now significantly reduce the effectiveness of these Russian attacks. The ability to intercept and neutralize incoming missiles and aircraft not only protects key assets on the ground, but also helps to preserve Ukraine's military strength for sustained operations. The impact of the Patriot systems is further amplified when combined with the introduction of Western fighter jets into the Ukrainian arsenal. NATO member countries have committed to supplying Ukraine with modern fighter aircraft such as the F-16s, which are renowned for their versatility and combat effectiveness. While the number of these jets may not be enough to grant Ukraine full air superiority, they are sufficient to create critical pockets of dominance in the skies during key operations. This capability enables Ukraine to conduct more coordinated and aggressive offensives, striking Russian positions with greater precision and effectiveness. These fighter jets, when used in conjunction with Patriot missile systems, provide Ukraine with a tactical edge that was previously out of reach. For instance, while Patriot systems focus on neutralizing aerial threats, the fighter jets can be deployed to target and destroy Russian artillery, command centers, and supply lines. This dual approach disrupts Russian operations on multiple fronts, forcing Moscow to spread its resources thinner and weakening its overall strategic position. Moreover, the arrival of these advanced systems signals a deeper commitment from Western nations to support Ukraine in its defense against Russian aggression. This support goes beyond mere rhetoric. It reflects a strategic calculation by the West to ensure that Ukraine is not only able to defend itself, but also to reclaim territory lost to Russian forces. The provision of such high-tech weaponry demonstrates that Western countries are willing to escalate their involvement in the conflict to prevent a Russian victory, which could have far-reaching implications for European and global security. For Russia, these developments are alarming. The Russian military, which has prided itself on its strength and technological prowess, now faces a formidable challenge from a Ukrainian military that is rapidly modernizing and adapting to the realities of 21st century warfare. The effectiveness of Ukraine's new capabilities undermines the narrative of Russian military superiority that Putin has long cultivated, both domestically and internationally. The introduction of Patriot systems and Western fighter jets also poses a significant strategic dilemma for Russia. Moscow must now decide how to respond to a Ukrainian military that is increasingly capable of defending its territory and launching counteroffensives. Any misstep in this response could further erode Russia's military position and exacerbate the political and economic pressures that Putin is already facing. The Patriot missile systems, in particular, have become a cornerstone of Ukraine's defense strategy. Capable of intercepting a wide range of aerial threats, from ballistic and cruise missiles to drones, these systems have significantly enhanced Ukraine's ability to protect its skies. As geopolitical expert Peter Zeihan noted in a recent interview, the deployment of these systems represents a crucial victory for Ukraine, allowing it to shore up its defenses and counter Russian air attacks more effectively. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Ukraine's ability to defend against Russian aerial assaults directly impacts its capacity to launch counteroffensives and reclaim occupied territories. However, while the Patriots provide robust defense, they are not sufficient on their own. The arrival of Western fighter jets, such as the F-16s from NATO members and the Mirage jets from France, adds a new dimension to Ukraine's military strategy. These aircraft, although limited in number, offer Ukraine the ability to establish brief pockets of air superiority. This is a critical development, as air superiority has been one of the key factors that has hampered Ukrainian offensives in the past. With these jets, Ukraine can now support its ground troops with aerial cover, making their movements more strategic and less vulnerable to Russian artillery. This combination of missile defense systems and fighter jets is set to change the course of the war. For the first time since the conflict began, Ukraine is poised to conduct coordinated offensives with aerial support. This shift could see Ukrainian forces reclaiming significant portions of territory that Russia has struggled to hold on to. The implications for Putin are severe. Not only does this threaten Russia's territorial gains, but it also undermines the narrative of Russian military superiority that Putin has cultivated. Russia's response to these developments has been underwhelming, particularly with the much-vaunted S-400 Triumph surface-to-air missile systems. These systems, touted as Russia's answer to the Patriot, have failed to live up to expectations. Reports from the battlefield indicate that Ukraine has been increasingly successful in neutralizing these systems, chipping away at what was supposed to be one of Russia's most formidable defenses. This has not only compromised Russia's ability to defend its airspace, but has also damaged the reputation of Russian military technology on the global stage. The decline in the effectiveness of Russia's military hardware, as demonstrated in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, is not only a tactical disadvantage on the battlefield, but also a strategic blow to Russia's global standing as a leading arms supplier. For decades, Russia has been one of the world's top exporters of military equipment, with countries like India, Vietnam, and various Middle Eastern nations relying heavily on Russian-made tanks, aircraft, missiles, and defense systems. However, as the war in Ukraine drags on, the limitations and vulnerabilities of these weapon systems are being exposed, leading to a growing sense of skepticism among Russia's traditional arms customers. India, in particular, has been a key client of Russian military technology for decades. Historically, India has purchased a wide array of Russian equipment, from fighter jets like the Sukhoi Su-30 to surface-to-air missile systems like the S-400 Triumph. The relationship between Russia and India in the defense sector has been mutually beneficial, with Russia providing India with relatively affordable and effective military hardware, while India provided Russia with a significant source of revenue. However, the war in Ukraine has cast a shadow over this long-standing partnership. The conflict has highlighted several critical weaknesses in Russian military equipment. Reports of Russian tanks being destroyed by advanced anti-tank weapons, the failure of missile systems like the S-400 to provide effective air defense, and the overall lack of reliability and technological sophistication compared to Western systems have all contributed to a growing disillusionment with Russian arms. Indian military planners who have observed the performance of Russian hardware in real time during the Ukraine conflict are beginning to question whether continued reliance on Russian technology is in India's best interest, particularly as India seeks to modernize its military to address evolving security challenges. This shift in perception is likely to have profound economic implications for Russia. The defense industry is a critical sector of the Russian economy, generating billions of dollars in revenue annually. According to reports, Russian arms exports have accounted for around 20% of the global arms trade, making it a major player in the international defense market. However, the reputational damage caused by the perceived underperformance of Russian military equipment in Ukraine threatens to undermine this revenue stream. As nations like India begin to reassess their defense procurement strategies, they may increasingly turn to alternative suppliers, such as the United States, France, and Israel, all of whom offer advanced battle-tested military technologies. This shift could lead to a significant reduction in Russia's share of the global arms market, depriving the Russian economy of much-needed foreign currency at a time when it is already under severe pressure from Western sanctions. Sanctions imposed by the United States, the European Union, and other allies in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine have targeted key sectors of the Russian economy, including finance, energy, and defense. These sanctions have restricted Russia's access to critical components and technologies needed to produce and maintain its military equipment, further compounding the challenges faced by the Russian defense industry. As a result, Russia's ability to fulfill existing arms contracts and attract new customers is being severely hampered. The loss of revenue from arms exports is not just an economic issue. It also has broader geopolitical ramifications. Russia has long used arms sales as a tool of influence, forging strategic partnerships with countries through the provision of military hardware. The erosion of this influence as traditional customers look elsewhere for their defense needs could diminish Russia's ability to project power and maintain its status as a global player in the defense sector. Furthermore, the decline in arms sales could lead to a weakening of Russia's own military capabilities. The defense industry relies on export revenues to fund research and development, production, and maintenance of military systems. A significant reduction in export income could limit Russia's ability to invest in next-generation military technologies, further widening the technological gap between Russia and Western military powers. As the war drags on, the strain on Russia's military resources is becoming increasingly apparent. The once feared Russian military is now struggling to maintain its operations, with reports of dwindling supplies and manpower. The loss of key assets, such as the S-400 systems and a significant portion of the Black Sea Fleet, has left Russia vulnerable on multiple fronts. The destruction of the Black Sea Fleet, in particular, is a symbolic and strategic blow to Russia's presence in Crimea, a region that is crucial to its operations in Ukraine. Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014, was meant to serve as a launchpad for Russian operations in Ukraine. However, the increasing effectiveness of Ukrainian forces, bolstered by Western support, has turned Crimea from a strategic asset into a potential liability. Ukrainian forces have not only targeted the Black Sea Fleet, but have also focused on disrupting Russia's logistical supply lines into the peninsula. The Kerch Bridge, a vital link between Russia and Crimea, has been a target of Ukrainian strikes, and further attacks could sever Russia's ability to reinforce and resupply its forces in the region. The loss of Crimea, or even just the ability to effectively use it as a military base, would be a catastrophic blow to Putin's war effort. It would symbolize a major strategic defeat and would likely lead to significant political repercussions in Russia. The fall of Crimea could also embolden Ukraine and its Western allies, further eroding Russia's position on the international stage. But the problems for Putin don't end with the battlefield. The political landscape in Russia is shifting, and the war in Ukraine is exacerbating underlying tensions within the country. The Russian political system, traditionally centered around a strongman leader, is showing signs of strain. Putin's image as an invincible leader is being challenged, not just by the losses in Ukraine, but also by the growing disillusionment among the Russian populace. Recent surveys indicate a decline in public trust in Russian state media, particularly among younger generations. This erosion of trust is dangerous for a regime that relies heavily on propaganda to maintain control. If the Russian people begin to see through the state's narrative, the foundation of Putin's power could begin to crumble. Moreover, the economic impact of the war is being felt across Russia. Sanctions, coupled with the immense cost of the war, are putting a strain on the Russian economy. The loss of revenue from declining arms sales, particularly to countries like India, adds another layer of financial pressure. As the economic situation deteriorates, the public's tolerance for the war is likely to wane, further weakening Putin's grip on power. One of the most telling signs of Putin's weakening position is the changing stance of Western nations. Initially cautious about provoking Russia, Western countries are now becoming more assertive in their support for Ukraine. The delivery of advanced weaponry and the lifting of restrictions on how Ukraine can use these weapons signal a shift in the West's approach. This change reflects a growing confidence that Russia is not as formidable as it once appeared, and that Putin's threats of retaliation may no longer carry the same weight. The West's increasing willingness to cross Russia's red lines without facing significant repercussions is a clear indication that Putin's power is diminishing. This perception of weakness is likely to embolden both Ukraine and its Western allies, potentially leading to more aggressive actions against Russia. For Putin, this presents a double-edged sword. Failing to respond to these provocations would further erode his image of strength, but escalating the conflict risks plunging Russia into a deeper crisis. Internally, Putin faces a complex and increasingly unstable situation. The Russian political system, built around the concept of a strongman leader, is inherently fragile. While it allows for centralized control, it is also vulnerable to sudden shifts in power. Historical precedents show that when Russian leaders lose their grip, the fall can be swift and decisive. The losses in Ukraine, combined with the growing discontent at home, could trigger such a collapse. The potential loss of Crimea represents one of the most significant and symbolic threats to Vladimir Putin's hold on power. Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014, has been a cornerstone of Putin's strategy to reassert Russia's influence in the post-Soviet space. The annexation was widely popular in Russia, bolstering Putin's domestic approval and reinforcing his image as a leader capable of restoring Russian greatness. However, the possibility of Ukraine reclaiming Crimea, or at least rendering it strategically untenable for Russia, could have catastrophic consequences for Putin's regime. Crimea holds immense strategic value for Russia. It serves as a critical military hub, hosting the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, which allows Russia to project power into the Mediterranean and beyond. The region also provides Russia with vital access to the Black Sea, facilitating trade and military operations. Losing control over Crimea would not only deprive Russia of these strategic advantages, but also deal a severe blow to the narrative of Russian resurgence that Putin has carefully cultivated. The Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea to the Russian mainland, is a vital supply route for the region. This 12-mile bridge, completed in 2018 at a cost of $3.7 billion, symbolizes Russia's commitment to solidifying its control over Crimea. It has been a lifeline for the peninsula, enabling the transport of goods, military supplies, and personnel. However, it also represents a strategic vulnerability. Should Ukraine succeed in targeting and disabling the Kerch Bridge, it would effectively sever Crimea's connection to Russia, isolating the region from critical supplies and reinforcements. Without the Kerch Bridge, Crimea's dependence on supplies from Russia would be severely compromised. The only other major route into Crimea is via the land corridor through southern Ukraine, which itself is vulnerable to Ukrainian counteroffensives. If Ukraine were to advance along this corridor, it could cut off access to Crimea entirely, turning the peninsula into a strategic liability for Russia rather than an asset. The prospect of Crimea being cut off from the rest of Russia raises the alarming possibility of a death camp scenario, where Russian forces and civilians in Crimea are trapped and starved of resources. In such a scenario, the Russian military presence in Crimea could quickly become untenable, with troops facing shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. The civilian population, which has grown since the annexation due to an influx of Russian settlers, would also suffer, leading to a humanitarian crisis on Russia's doorstep. For Putin, the loss of Crimea, or the transformation of the region into a besieged outpost, would be more than just a military defeat. It would be a devastating blow to his political image. The annexation of Crimea was a bold move that solidified Putin's reputation as a strong and decisive leader, capable of reversing the perceived losses of the Soviet Union's collapse. Losing Crimea would not only reverse that narrative, but also expose the fragility of Putin's achievements, potentially leading to widespread unrest in Russia. Domestically, the loss of Crimea could spark a crisis of confidence in Putin's leadership. The Russian public, which has largely supported Putin's aggressive foreign policy, might begin to question his competence and the wisdom of his decisions. This could erode the carefully constructed image of Putin as a leader who brings stability and strength to Russia. The resulting disillusionment could lead to increased opposition, protests, and even challenges from within the Russian elite. The potential for widespread unrest in Russia is not a far-fetched scenario. Historical precedents suggest that major military defeats have often led to significant political upheaval in Russia. The loss of the Crimean War in the 19th century, for example, led to widespread discontent and contributed to the eventual abolition of serfdom. Similarly, Russia's defeat in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905 sparked the First Russian Revolution, which set the stage for the eventual fall of the Tsarist regime. Internationally, the loss of Crimea would also have significant implications. It would be seen as a major victory for Ukraine and its Western allies, potentially shifting the momentum of the war and leading to increased support for Ukraine's efforts to reclaim other occupied territories. It would also weaken Russia's strategic position in the Black Sea, reducing its ability to project power in the region and diminishing its influence over neighboring countries. Moreover, the symbolic impact of losing Crimea could not be overstated. Crimea is more than just a piece of territory for Russia. It is a symbol of national pride and a key element of Putin's narrative of restoring Russia's greatness. The loss of Crimea would be a public humiliation for Putin, both domestically and internationally, undermining his authority and weakening his ability to maintain control over the Russian political system. Moreover, the human cost of the war is mounting. The losses Russia has sustained are staggering, with estimates of Russian casualties reaching into the hundreds of thousands. The long-term demographic impact of these losses cannot be overstated. Russia's population was already in decline before the war, and the loss of so many young men could have severe consequences for the country's future. The depletion of Russia's manpower could lead to a labor shortage, further crippling the economy and exacerbating social unrest. Putin's attempts to bolster his forces by recruiting foreign soldiers and press-ganging ethnic minorities into service are signs of desperation. These tactics, reminiscent of the Soviet era, may provide short-term manpower but do little to address the underlying issues facing Russia. The reliance on foreign fighters and marginalized communities suggests that Putin is struggling to maintain the support of the Russian population, a critical factor in his ability to sustain the war effort. As Ukraine continues to receive support from the West, and as it becomes more effective in its military operations, the pressure on Russia will only increase. The prospect of a drawn-out conflict is a nightmare scenario for Putin. Not only does it risk further military losses, but it also threatens to destabilize Russia from within. The loss of public support, the erosion of military capability, and the growing boldness of the West all point to a future where Putin's reign could come to an end. The war in Ukraine has exposed the vulnerabilities of Vladimir Putin's leadership. What was supposed to be a demonstration of Russian strength has turned into a quagmire that is weakening Russia on multiple fronts. The loss of key military assets, the economic impact of sanctions, and the growing disillusionment among the Russian populace are all chipping away at Putin's strongman image. As the conflict continues, the risks to Putin's grip on power are becoming more pronounced. Whether through a major military defeat, a loss of public support, or a combination of both, the possibility that Putin could be finished as a political force in Russia is becoming increasingly likely.